Hello and welcome again to this edition of Capital Dateline. I'm your host, Brad Swanson. We are once again coming to you from the headquarters of the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association, just a few blocks from Florida's capital. Today, we're once again going to bring you the inside story of what's happening in the Capitol and across the state, because I am joined by our special guest, Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so summer is not waiting for anybody. There is still a ton of stuff going on, and we're going to start with the governor's race. So Senator Latvala jumped in. How does that change up the mix right now?
Well, we've seen Senator Latvala and House Speaker Richard Corcoran kind of going at it a little bit. Corcoran hasn't announced that he's going to run, but I think everybody pretty much thinks he is and is laying the groundwork to run. So, you know, we've got a pretty heated Republican primary already. Obviously, everybody knows that Agriculture Commissioner Adam Putnam's running. He's been running for months. And then Latvala gets in this month, and Corcoran will probably get in after session next year. But they're going at it already pretty well. I mean, you know, Corcoran's been laying the groundwork. He's been taking some positions on things that kind of gotten him a lot of attention around the state. He called for a ban on public financing. That was one of the things he did recently. He's also continued going after some of these local tourism agencies about not, allegedly at least, not disclosing information about how they use tax money. And these are getting headlines across the state, although he's not a declared candidate. And meanwhile, he's raising a bunch of money for his political committee. So I think everybody thinks he's going to be in. Right.
So you've got these guys. You've got one in, or you got two in. Speaker Corcoran may jump in, but the social media surrogates, if you will, are already launching very well-produced ads and their paid promotions both on Twitter and Facebook. So how do you think that's playing early now, and how do you think it will play?
Some of it's not even surrogates. Some of it's the candidates themselves. Right. I mean, you know, Corcoran put out this thing last week about wanting to ban public financing, and Latvala tweets at him saying, you know, I've been out there talking to people for years. Nobody's ever mentioned public financing to me. They care about the opioid crisis and schools and so on. So they're already taking shots at each other. Right. And but you know, I think this is only going to ramp up with I mean, we've seen social media, the role of social media in these campaigns over the past few years, and particularly with the president's campaign. You know, we've seen the role that's going to play, and people are just going to, I mean, it's going to be hammering it for the next year, I think.
Yeah. So let's talk about that opioid issue. So Senator Latvala has definitely engaged in that conversation, both in the Capitol and on the trail. Typically, addictions and social, you know, care issues are usually the bastion of Democrat talking points. How did this become a Republican senator's issue? And
well, one, I think it's a really smart strategy. I mean, you know, there are people dying literally every single day in this state because of opioid overdoses, not just in Florida, but across the country. And he's recognized that is a major problem, particularly in some areas of the state. You know, we hear a lot about Palm Beach County, and we hear a lot about the Sarasota Manatee area, that there are very intense problems in some of these areas. And he seized on that issue and has kind of taken a leadership role on it. You know, he held a public roundtable sort of thing in Palm Beach County early this month, and then he just recently asked the governor to free up about $20 million for treatment and some of those things. So, you know, it's probably, you know, I mean, I think it's a really smart political move, but I also think there's good policy behind it, which is a good combination. I often wondered last year during particularly the presidential race last year, why Democrats didn't seize on that issue. I mean, there are certain areas of this country where it is a plague. And, you know, Latvala has recognized that, I think, and is making an issue. Yeah. The other thing is, I really expect it to be a big issue during the 2018 session. I think there's going to be a lot of attention on it, just like there was, you know, 5-6 years ago when the pill mill crisis was going on. You know, Attorney General Pam Bondi kind of swooped in and seized that issue.
Yeah, national recognition and media.
And really closed down those pill mill, well, she and the legislature took steps that effectively led to the closure of a lot of those pill mills that had proliferated, particularly in South Florida. So I kind of expect this issue, opioid issue, to really become a prominent issue during the 2018 campaign. Again, it's good politics and it's good policy. I mean, there is a real problem there. It's not a made-up situation. The other thing, frankly, who's going to oppose it? I mean, in terms of as long as the solutions are reasonable, it's an issue that I think everybody can get behind. And in an election year, that's something they like to do.
Well, and you contrast the friction between Senator Latvala and Speaker Corcoran in their budding campaigns, and meanwhile, Commissioner Putnam's out there just talking launchpad. Florida needs to be the launchpad versus the prize for a life well earned. I mean, these are diametrically different messages that we're seeing out there. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Well, I think the thing, too, you got to recognize is that Commissioner Putnam, he announced his campaign in May, but effectively he'd been running for a while, raising a lot of money, building more of an organization than maybe the others have been able to do at this point. So I think his campaign is a little bit more mature at this point than the others are. He's not throwing the bombs necessarily, or as many of them as the others may. But I mean, this is going to, if those three are in the primary next year, it's going to be a very competitive situation, and we're going to see a lot of heat from all sides.
It should be interesting to see how that all breaks out. So we go from the Republicans, where you've got stacked candidates at the gubernatorial level. You got stacked, a few folks chiming in for the rest of the cabinet. But on the Democrat side, while you still have issues with fundraising at the gubernatorial level, there's virtually no candidates in the rest of the cabinet. What do you see going on there in cabinet races?
The Democrats have had a real problem particularly the last two election cycles, but even going back earlier than that, in terms of getting good candidates to run for cabinet races. And, at this point, they're going to have some challenges in winning any of those cabinet seats the way they're going. They don't have a viable candidate for agriculture commissioner at this point. Meanwhile, the Republicans have, they have four candidates, two of whom are in the legislature at this point, Denise Grimsley and Matt Caldwell. Another one is Baxter Troutman, a former legislator who has already put up, I think, more than $1 million of his own money into
self-funding, ready to go.
He's a very wealthy, and he's self-funding. So, in that race, for instance, the Democrats don't even have a candidate. In the Attorney General's race, they have Ryan Torrens, who's an attorney out of Tampa who has no political experience. Meanwhile, the Republicans have, Ashley Moody, who's a former judge down in Hillsborough County, has been raising a lot of money for that race. Jay Fant, who's a legislator out of Jacksonville, has been traveling the state. So I think they're far more visible than Torrens is. In the CFO race, the Democrats do have Jeremy Ring, who's a former legislator out of Broward County. But his fundraising has been pretty lackluster at this point. Now, he is wealthy, so he may be able to pour some of his own money into that race. But he really hasn't raised a lot at this point, which is not a good sign. I think, you want to build up a lot of money as early as you can, and the money hasn't flown that way. We don't know what's going to happen on the Republican side in that race, but all signs are pointing to Jimmy Patronis, who was appointed by Governor Scott to CFO this summer, to run. And if he does, he's going to have financial backing, a lot of it. He's probably not well known around the state, but neither is Ring. The other...
and frankly, the governor is in Jimmy Patronis's corner on that, and that, a dual, candidate party train could, amplify his brand.
Everybody thinks that Governor Scott's running for the U.S. Senate next year. So if he's out in the U.S. Senate campaigning for that, and Patronis is standing next to him, that gives him a lot of visibility. The other one that's getting a lot of conversation is Republican Senator Tom Lee may run. He's certainly indicated he might. He ran for that office in 2006 unsuccessfully. But he's certainly pointing to that he's considering it. So the Republicans are in they're in a better place right now than the Democrats on those cabinet races, and the cabinet seats are important. In the gubernatorial campaign on the Democratic side, they do have three candidates: Gwen Graham and Andrew Gillum and Chris King. The big question is whether John Morgan's going to get into that on that side. But
yeah, I mean, and it's not just on that side. John Morgan, when you inject his name across the pantheon of candidates, I mean, his name ID is just unbelievable. I mean, it's the For the People ads. Drive
down the road, you'll see him on a bus, you'll see him on a billboard. I mean, turn on the radio, you'll hear him or his kids. So everybody knows the name.
A campaign flyer might be antithetical at this point, right?
I don't know, but he's another one who has a lot of money. He can self-fund to a certain extent at least, and And the question is whether he wants to get in
Well,
that mud pit.
but you look at that candidacy, he was one of the prime backers of the marijuana amendment, and if you think about, the ability to reach independents, which is obviously the third largest party in the state of Florida, it's an enormous party, uncategorized, but yet 73% of Floridians voted for marijuana, and some might say John Morgan has that exact list of those independents with that one issue.
Well, he does, and no offense to Latvala or Corcoran particularly, but I can guarantee you John Morgan has higher name ID around the state than those two guys do. And, we saw with the presidential election last year that, let's face it, President Trump had a lot of things that people take shots at in his personal life and so on, but he was able to overcome it with his name ID and his salesmanship and so on. And Morgan, in some ways, I'm sure he would not want to be compared to President Trump, but in some ways he has those same dynamics going. Yeah, I mean, he's got that ability to communicate directly with the people already. So, all right, well, let's turn from there to a few other items. We've got the Florida Supreme Court. They have engaged in a new action. Tell us about that. Well, this is a big deal. The Supreme Court's going to hear arguments on November 1st in a case that's filed, and the bottom line is that who is going to be able to appoint 3 members of the Florida Supreme Court out of 7? And the whole issue is that Governor Scott's term expires in January 2019 at the same time, essentially the same time, as 3 justices are going to have to retire. Those justices, Barbara Pariente, Fred Lewis, and Peggy Quince, are part of a liberal, or what is widely perceived as a liberal bloc on the court. So the question in this case is whether Governor Scott will appoint their successors or whether the next governor will appoint their successors. And if a Republican is elected to succeed Governor Scott, it's kind of a push. I mean, because that Governor Scott or a new Republican governor are going to appoint conservative justices to replace them. But if a Democrat gets elected governor, this case makes a big difference, because and if that Democratic governor were allowed to appoint the new justices, it could help shape the court in a different manner for the next 10, foreseeable future. So conservatives have been upset with this Supreme Court for years. And, the majority of the Supreme Court has been generally liberal, particularly on a lot of, business-related issues, insurance-related issues, those sorts of things that have made conservatives very unhappy. Right. So conservatives see these with those 3 justices having to leave the court, they see an opportunity to really reshape the court in a conservative fashion that has not been there in the past. So in the last 2 election cycles, that's been, the big one for, who's going to win the next governorship, because that person hypothetically will get these appointments. And the flip side of it is the Democrats want to hold on to those 3 seats as much as they can, because that really is their it's not supposed to work this way, but that's sort of the base of power for Democrats in state government at this point. So, that's where they can block things that the governor and the legislature do. Well, in policy, that's the ultimate long ball. It's not flashy, it's not in front of the voters every day, but this is the one that makes the difference on whether the laws you pass have legs or not. Well, we've seen it time and again, and there's some big cases that are going to be up at that court in the before January 2019 that they're going to decide. And, this is, again, this is kind of a wonky debate, really, when you look at the whole case comes down to, like, who leaves office first, the governor or the 3 justices? Right. I mean, there's all these sort of intricate gymnastics going on in this case. Is it 8 a.m.? Is it 5 p.m.? Is it midnight? Is it who has the full day? Who doesn't? I mean, you can look at those briefs, and it's going to be a judgment call. pardon the pun, for the Supreme Court.
Right.
But whatever
we know you're very punny. So
whatever they decide is going to be a big deal. I mean, this case was brought by the League of Women Voters and Common Cause. And, they have lined up with Democrats, particularly in redistricting over the past few years. And so, their argument is the next governor should be able to appoint the justices. Right. And of course, Governor Scott's office is arguing in the case that Governor Scott should be able to appoint.
The current governor, yeah.
Right.
All right, so let's move away from the Supreme Court. There's a lot of other activity there that's kind of simmering, but nothing really concrete. Let's talk a little bit about Representative Carlos Trujillo. Carlos Trujillo was just appointed as a deputy UN secretary, and so what does that mean for his role in the legislature?
Well, there's been this rumors and discussion for quite a while that he may be appointed to an ambassadorship. He plays a pretty important role in the legislature. He's the House Appropriations Chairman, so he's the budget guy in the House. And this came out late Friday that he was being appointed to this role at the UN. Essentially, my understanding, he's sort of a deputy to Nikki Haley, who's the UN ambassador. There's been some reports though that he's not going to leave the legislature, that at least in the short term. Right. That he's going to be doing it at the same time. So I'm not sure how it's going to affect the legislature at this point. Committee meetings start 2 weeks. Right. So, things are going to keep rolling forward. The other thing is he has to be confirmed, which sometimes takes quite a while anyway. Yeah. But, he's a young man, and this is a huge boost to him and his career, I would think.
Yeah, well, and you look at that role and the confirmation, and it's almost like the judge's issue. When is it officially official? Is it on appointment? Is it when he receives the first paycheck? And I'm sure some of his opponents will be looking at that with a little more scrutiny.
Yeah, we haven't heard that. We haven't really heard any organized opposition at this point. But what goes on in Washington sometimes. It just takes a while, even if there is an opposition.
That's crazy.
There's a whole lot of people waiting out there to be confirmed. And some of them have been waiting years.
All right, well, we'll keep up on your confirmation because I heard you put in for one. All right, that's all the time we have with you, sir. Thank you very much for your insights.
I really doubt that's going to happen.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to Capital Dateline. Make sure you check us out on our Facebook page at Capital Dateline Online, or hit us up on our Twitter feed at the FCTA. Thanks for tuning in.